Hello my friends. Welcome to a new video about a healthy lifestyle. Subscribe to the channel to receive all new videos. How do plants make food sour or poisonous? Bacteria, microbes, or germs? Thousands of microscopic plants can be found in dust and dirt of all kinds, too small to be seen without assistance. A microscope magnifies them to the point that their form and growth may be viewed readily. Germs or microbes are the names for these tiny plants. Bacteria is another term for them. There's so little that 1 million of them would barely cover the head of a pin if set side by side. Germs come in a variety of shapes and sizes. Some have the shape of small balls, while others have the shape of tiny rods. Many of them, despite their similar appearances, grow in completely different ways. There are around 20 different types that proliferate in our bodies and cause diseases like diphtheria and tuberculosis. We get measles and scarlet fever because we contracted the disease germs from someone who had them developing in their body. Most germs live on dead materials rather than our living body, causing it to dissolve or change form. If you throw an apple or a piece of meat on the ground, it will quickly alter and resemble the dirt. Millions of bacteria are responsible for the change, which is known as decay. Certain bacteria are the farmer's closest friends, as they aid in making the soil rich so that the crops can flourish. Mold. Sweeping creates dust that includes small living seed organisms. These will grow into grayish fluffy spots if they fall on bread, cheese, or fruit and are kept moist in a warm room for a day or two. Mold is responsible for these spots. Mold can also be identified by the greenish-white development on the tops of canned fruit and berries that have been left in a warm kitchen overnight. Mold is a type of plant that grows from tiny spherical entities that act as seeds. Mold seed bodies are found in all types of dust and frequently fly through the air. As a result, food should be covered whenever feasible, especially when sweeping. Mold imparts an unpleasant flavor to bread, cheese, and other foods, but it does not cause illness. How germs develop. Germs will not develop in extreme cold, but they will not die if they are frozen. Most bacteria are killed by boiling for 1 minute. Drying will stop the germs from multiplying, but it will not eliminate them completely. Many of them are killed by sunlight. Germs thrive in moist, warm environments. A germ lengthens a little and then divides in the middle as it grows. It can do this so swiftly that one germ can turn into 2 in as little as 15 minutes. After then, each of these will be divided. In this manner, a single germ can produce millions of germs in a single day. Meat poisoning is a term used to describe the act of spoiling meat. If you leave fresh meat in a warm environment for even 1 day, it will spoil. In warm temperatures, a huge greenish-blue fly that buzzes around will lay its eggs on meat. The next day, these will hatch into maggots, which are small worms. They grow quickly and transform into flies within a few days. Germs will ruin meat that isn't kept cool. They feed on the flesh and produce a toxin that renders it unfit for consumption. When there's a terrible odor, it's a sign that bacteria are at work. To preserve food from rotting, every home should have a cold cellar or an icebox. Keeping food from going bad. The bacteria that cling to dirty dishes and hands and cause the sourness of milk and cooked food of any kind are always present in the air and cling by the thousands to unwashed dishes and hands. Meat or fruit that has been prepared and kept properly covered will last for years. Many people store fruit and vegetables in jars that are heated to kill bacteria and sealed tight to keep out other germs so they can be used in the winter. The alcohol plant or yeast. A plant called yeast can sometimes ruin sweet cider and other fruit drinks. This plant has the shape of a football and is so little that 1 million of them would not form a bulb the size of a pinhead. It is found on the skins of fruits and floats around in the air. Yeast is also known as the alcohol plant because it converts a portion of a sweet substance like fruit juice into a biting substance called alcohol when it develops in it. It also emits a gas at the same time. The bubbling or frothing in beer is caused by this gas. When the millions of yeast plants in a store-bought yeast cake are mixed with bread dough, they develop and produce gas. This separates the dough pieces and makes it lighter. The small amount of alcohol generated is completely depleted throughout the baking process. Other bacteria known as vinegar plants convert the alcohol produced by yeast growing in sweet cider to vinegar after a few weeks. Because sour cider contains alcohol, it may leave users ill and inebriated. Grape juice is fermented by yeast, which produces wine. Instructions on insects and health. Malaria or fever and chills. Malaria is a sickness in which the patient has a chill followed by a fever on a daily or every other day basis. Thousands of people in our country's warm regions suffer from this disease, and hundreds of them die each year. People are unable to reside in some areas since the disease infects everyone who visits. A doctor discovered small animals in the blood of malaria victims many years ago. He suspected they were to blame for the disease, but he couldn't figure out how they got into the bloodstream. Discovering how malaria germs enter the bloodstream. Mosquitoes were always found wherever there was malaria, which had been observed for many years. In the year 1900, two men set out to see if they could live in a malaria-infested area without being infected with the disease provided mosquitoes were prohibited from biting them. They spent the entire season in a cottage in the midst of a large number of malaria patients. They inhaled the same air, ate the same food, and drank the same water as individuals who were sick, yet they were unaffected. The only thing they did differently than those who got sick was use screens to keep insects out of their rooms at night. This experiment, as well as many others, has demonstrated that we only develop malaria from mosquito bites. Malaria is carried by a small number of mosquitoes. Malaria is not frequent in all mosquito-infested areas, and it has been shown that just one mosquito species carries the disease. Straight-backed and humped are the two most prevalent types. To prove that the straight-backed ones were the ones who caused the injury, 3 of them were permitted to suck blood from a guy in Italy who was suffering from malaria. They were then transported to London, where they were allowed to bite a healthy man. He became ill with malaria after only a few days. Many studies have shown that humpback mosquitoes, which are present almost everywhere in our nation, do not carry malaria pathogens. Yellow fever is a disease that causes the body to turn yellow. Yellow fever remained a scourge in many southern communities until 1901. Thousands of people died as a result of it. Many people would run to the countryside if a terrible sickness broke out in a metropolis because they believed they couldn't breathe the air without being infected with the disease. Some people believed mosquitoes were to blame for the sickness, thus studies were conducted in Cuba in 1900 to see if mosquitoes truly did transport yellow fever viruses. 7 men made their home in a mosquito-free room with plenty of screens. They slept on pillows and blankets that had been used by yellow fever victims and wore clothing that had been worn by others who had contracted the disease. Many people believed that the bedclothes were contaminated with fever germs, and that all of the men would be infected. Despite living in the presence of these dirty materials for 3 weeks, none of them became ill. Another group of 7 males was picked for the experiment. A vast space was set aside and properly cleaned. We only used clean bedding and clean clothes. The men were provided only pure food and water, but mosquitoes were released into the room, which had been sucking blood from a fevered individual. 6 of the 7 guys were ill with a fever within a few days, and 1 of them died. We now know from these and other studies that this horrible disease is only transmitted from the sick via mosquito bites. Mosquito life cycle. Before we can get rid of any pests, we need to know where the eggs are laid and where the young are raised. Mosquitoes lay their eggs in standing water. The water could be in a huge pond, a rain bucket, a cistern, or an old tomato can. The eggs hatch into black, writhing things known as wigglers a day or 2 after the female lays 1 or 200 eggs. They transform into flying mosquitoes after 10 to 20 days. Because of their tendencies, it is best to kill them when they are young. Mosquitoes, how to get rid of them. Mosquitoes kill almost 1,000 people per day in the world during hot weather, as well as making many others severely sick. Mosquitoes must be eradicated in order to avoid disease and death. In 1 year, doctors in New York and Philadelphia killed almost 5,000 individuals because they didn't know how to stop the sickness from spreading. When the yellow fever epidemic hit New Orleans in 1905, only around 500 people died since doctors had discovered that the disease is only spread by the yellow fever mosquito at the time. As a result, they began destroying mosquitoes. All of the ponds and stagnant pools of water that couldn't be drained were sprayed with kerosene. Because the oil seeps inside their breathing tube, which they stick up to the surface of the water to collect air, the baby mosquitoes die. All rain barrels and tin cans had been emptied, and the cisterns had been completely covered. Mosquitoes were killed by men, women, and children on weekdays and Sundays because they understood they were saving human lives. The destructive fever was brought to a half. Flies are notorious for making people sick. Because house flies do not bite, only a few people are terrified of them. Despite their small size and seeming innocuousness, we know that they kill far more people each year than rabid dogs, venomous snakes, and all other animals combined. Flies can be found in slops, spittoons, and other filthy places. As they crawl around on the table, at the grocery store, or among the milk cans, they pick up thousands of tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and cholera germs, which they subsequently spread over our food. More than 1,000 of our soldiers were sickened by a fever spread by flies years ago. Flies that fed on the slops from a sick room and then crawled about in the milk cans from which those who fell sick used milk made 50 people sick with a fever in Denver, Colorado, in 1908. How to get rid of the flies? At any given time, around 100 eggs are laid by house flies in the soil thrown out of horse stables, in garbage cans, or in any other dirty location. The eggs hatch into little white worms that eat on the dirt in a day or two. The worms turn into flies after a week or two. Flies can be kept out of dwellings indoors, as well as darkening rooms while not in use. Those that manage to obtain access may be captured with fly traps. Food should be covered at all times, whether in the store or at home. It is not safe to eat sweets that has been wiped by flies or to drink milk that has been infected by them. The most effective strategy to rid a community of flies is for everyone to work together and maintain the entire area clean. There should be no dead grass, weeds, or rags in the backyards or alleys. Stable cleanings should be taken away or kept in firmly sealed boxes once a week. Garbage cans must have tight-fitting lids to prevent the young from hatching and growing within. Other disease-transmitting insects. The sleeping illness has destroyed rich settlements in several parts of Africa. Thousands of indigenous die each year as a result of this sickness. The germs are spread from one person to the next via a fly bite. Some fleas transmit plague germs, which swept over Asia and Europe a few centuries ago, killing hundreds of people every day. In India, the disease is currently widespread, and it was also present in California in 1908 and 1910. In warm countries, the bedbug can spread a variety of fevers and can potentially carry leprosy and typhoid fever. Insects are dangerous and should be kept out of the house, according to these facts. Anyone who is bothered by these little bugs in the house should write to the Department of Agriculture in Washington, D.C. for instructions on how to get rid of them. For more about diseases and health, watch our videos. If you liked the video, press like and subscribe the channel.